Hello everyone, we are from group 2. So in this video, our group will present our presentation. It's about language variation. Beforehand, let me introduce my group members. So the first is Pury Puspita Sari, the second is Mega, the third is Izzatul Jannah, the fourth is Novilda, and the last is me, Asni. So in this presentation, the focus was on language variation in multilingual communities. In this section, the focus moved to language variation in monolingual communities. People often use a language to signal their membership of particular groups and to construct different aspects of their social identity. Social status, gender, age, ethnicity, and the kinds of social networks that people belong to turn out to be important dimensions of identity in many communities. Let's see the illustration, the way people use language to signal and enact such affiliation in this example 1. So, from the example, when you answer the telephone, you can often make some pretty accurate guesses about various characteristics of speaker. Pat was able to deduce quite a lot about Mark's caller, even though the caller had said nothing explicit about herself. Most listeners can identify that the caller is a child without any problem. When the caller is an adult, it is usually easy to tell whether a speaker is female or male. If the person has a distinctive regional accent, then the regional origins will be evidenced even from a short utterance. And it may also be possible to make a reasonable guess about the person's socio-economic or educational background, as Pat did. Before we talk about regional dialects, let's us talk about dialect. Dialect is a kind of varieties which has grammatical and also phonological differences from other varieties. They also state that dialect is often applied to form of language, particularly spoken in more isolated parts of the world and has no written form. Dialect divided into two types, namely the geographical dialect continuum and the social dialect continuum. So, what is regional dialects? Regional dialects refers to linguistic differences that accumulate in a particular geographic region. Dialect variation in regional dialect is low influenced by three factors completing each other, which are time, place, and socio-culture. The statements mean that each region has different dialect. However, because of the chain of mutual intelligible between dialect, people from different regions which are still connected can still understand each other when they speak. The differences between distinguishing one village from another can be larger or smaller, but the further the distance we go from the point we start, the more distinctive the dialect will be. Regional dialect divided into three types. The first is international variation, the second is international variation, and the third is cross-continental variation. The first type of regional dialect is international variation. In international variation, there are three levels. The first is the accent or pronunciation, the second is the vocabulary, and the third is the grammatical. On the accent level, the word like that, ayah, pronounced by the New Zealander would sound like that meninggal to a British speaker. And the word bed, buruk, would also sound like bed, tempat tidur. And the second level is vocabulary. So on the vocabulary level, Australians use the form sole parent, while the people of England use single parents, and New Zealander call them solo parents. The American speaker would say gas while the British would say petrol. Elevator instead of lift and luggage instead of baggage. The third level is the grammatical level. So on the grammatical level, the American would use the form do you have rather than have you got, and did you play rather than have you played. They would also use the form gotten while the British use got. So the second types of regional dialect is intranational variation. Here, the focus is on the dialect differences within one country. For example, in UK, the Cockney differs for Scottish and from Geordie. There is less regional variation in the areas where English was introduced early, such as New Zealand and Australia, although there is a social variation. In such countries where there is international communication and small population, the regional variation was not able to develop. In New Zealand, dialect differences are greater in Maori than in English. For example, Maori words starting with WH differ in pronunciation from one place to another. On the level of vocabulary, the word fish in most areas is ika, but it is ngohi in another. The word kiri-kiri means gravel in the west but means hand in the east of New Zealand. The third type of regional dialect is cross-continental variation. In cross-continental variation, we have three dialect change across Europe. The first is one links all dialects of German, Dutch, and Flemish from Switzerland through Austria and Germany to the Netherlands and Belgium. The second is one link dialect of Portuguese, Spanish, Catalan, French, and Italian. A Scandinavian change links between Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish. Therefore, the Swedish and Norwegian. The change are also found in India, and they clarify the arbitrariness of the distinction between language and dialect. Defining the contrast between German and Dutch or Swedish and Norwegian using only linguistic feature is difficult. This is because the linguistic feature overlap and usage in one area emerges to another. Therefore, we must look to the social and political function of the language as well as its linguistic feature. Therefore, a language is a group of dialects that are usually linguistically similar, used by different social groups who choose to say that they are speakers of one language that unite them and represent them to other groups. This explains why a Chinese who speaks Mandarin doesn't understand the Chinese who speak Cantonese, although the two dialects are dialects of Chinese language. So guys, I think that's all of my explanation.
Okay, the next material is about standard English and social dialect. So standard English is more accommodating and allows for some variation within its boundaries. In standard English, a limited amount of grammatical variation is acceptable. For example, I have not washed the dishes yet today, and I haven't washed the dishes yet today. The example have different grammatical, but in standard English it's acceptable. The dialect we grace with the name Standard English is spoken with many different accents. Because the standard dialect is always the first to be codified, it is difficult to avoid defining other dialects without contrasting them with the standard. It is very important to understand there is nothing linguistically inferior about non-standard forms. They are simply different from which happen to be used by more socially prestigious speakers. In the cat's dialects, the language generally reflects the groups. They use different social dialects. Not surprisingly, these social distinctions have corresponding speech differences. A person's dialect is an indication of their social background, so people can be grouped together on the basis of similar social and economic factors because the cat's dialect. Social class dialect is linguistic varieties which are distinguishable by their vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. So the speech of people from different social as well as regional groups may differ in these ways. The term social class in here used as a shorthand term for differences between people which are associated with difference in social prestige, wealth, and education. Social dialect research in many different countries has revealed a consistent relationship between social class and language pattern. In the conclusion, is people from different social classes speak differently.
Okay, the next material about gender and age. Gender and age, the linguistic form used by women and men to different degrees in all speech community. A gender exclusive speech different highly structured community. Women and men do not speak in exactly the same way as each other in any community. There are communities where the language is shared by women and men, but particular linguistic features occur only in the woman's speech or only in the man's speech. Words shaped in other languages contrast because women and men use different affixes. In some languages, there are also differences between the vocabulary items used by women and men. Some languages signal the gender of the speakers in the pronoun system. And the second point, gender preferential speech features, social dialect research. Women and men in Western community do not use completely different forms due to overlapping of social rules. They use different quantities or frequency of the same forms. Women tend to use more of the standard form than men, while men use more of the vernacular form than women do. The next point, explanation of women linguistic behavior. First point, the social status explanation. Women tend to use more standard speech form because they are more status conscious compared to men. Women are very sensitive with the environment and thus they are aware of the way they signal their social background or social status in the community. The second point, women roles as guardian of society values. Society looks up to women and expects better behavior from them, especially the way they carry themselves in terms of language. They are expected to speak more standard form of language compared to men. The third point, subordinate groups must be polite. Women are considered as a subordinate group, saying that they must be polite and must avoid offending men. They must speak carefully and politely. However, it is argued that by using vernacular speech form. And the last point, vernacular form express machism. Men regard vernacular form positively and value them highly because they carry macho connotation of masculinity and toughness. Okay, the next point is some alternative explanation. First point, how are women categorized? When it comes to women's social class, research looked back at the husband occupation as their major criterion. At times, women are more educated than their husband, thus they tend to use better standard form which reflects their social groups. The second point, the influence of the interviewer and the context. When women are interviewed, they tend to shift to the speech of the person they are talking to. They will use more standard form compared to men. As in context, women's greater use of standard speech forms might then simply be a reflection of their sensitive to contextual factors. Okay, the next point, it's graded features of speech. First, pitch of voice. Male voice generally sound lower in pitch than women's, and adult voice sound deeper than children's. However, the pitch ranges of women and men overlap to a considerable extent. Some women natural speaking pitch is deeper than some men. The second point, social and cultural factor. Social and cultural factor, it is more masculine to speak with a lower pitched voice and greater use of vernacular forms. The third point, public domain. Public domain influence in public domain has been a male prerogative until recently. The fact then that women politicians often have deeper voice than others may reflect the public preference for voice with a masculine association in politics. And next point, vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. There are patterns which are appropriate for 10 years old or teenagers which disappear as they grow older. The extensive swear word vocabulary which some teenagers use is likely to change over time. Adult men restrict swearing largely to all male settings. The last point, slang. Current slang is the linguistic prerogative of young people, shown out in the mouth of an older person. A strong signal membership of a particular group, the young and old. Okay, the next point is age and social dialect datum. First point, frequency of vernacular form. For example, childhood is height, adolescence is height, middle age is stately low, and old age is height. In other words, as people get older, their speech becomes gradually more standard, and the later it becomes less standard and once again characterized by vernacular form. The second point, vernacular form as solidarity markers. New York gang members delete the ID, which signal past tense at the ends of words much more often than adults from the same social group. Gang members use more multiple negation than adults. The last point, multilingual context. For example, young people monolingual in French. Working with 30 until 50 bilingual, an asset for people. Retirement refers to French monolingualism with family and friends. Bilingualism functions as the equivalent of a linguistic plastic form in a monolingual community. Okay, the last point is its grading and language change. The first point, its graded features. Pronunciation of middle-aged people more standard and less vernacular. Common pattern of vernacular features. The next point, the pronunciation of standard T may be changed in New Zealand speech. Vernacular pronunciation, medial flap and glottal stop are gradually displacing standard T in the speech of younger people. Know the normal distribution of stable form through the community. Without this, it will be easy to make a wrong deduction. And I think enough for me from my explanation about gender and age. Thank you very much.
Ethnicity and social network. When people belong to the same group, they often speak similarly. But there are many different groups in a community, and so an individual may share linguistic feature with a range of other speakers. And in this part, I will explain how ethnicity and social networks affect on people's speech pattern. The first one is ethnicity. Ethnicity in linguistics is considered to be shared characteristics such as culture, language, religion, tradition, which can contribute to a person or group's identity. The ethnic group itself has been defined as a group that regards itself or is regarded by others that will help to distinguish the group from the surrounding community. Many ethnic groups use a distinctive language to identify their ethnicity. If the main language is used, the speaker may incorporate linguistic signal like a short phrase, language tag, verbal filler that can identify their ethnic background. The example of ethnicity in the linguistic is in African American vernacular English. It has some features which do not occur in standard American English. These linguistic differences act as a symbol of ethnicity. It exists particularly in the northern cities of the United States. Another example is British Black English. Members of British Black community, mostly born in England, speak a variety of Jamaican Creole. It is also known as patois. Patois used as a symbol of ethnic identity. Those people who are not fluent in patois use English with patois features, and this way their English is marked as black, which signal their identity. And the last example is Maori English. In Maori English, they greet each other by saying kia ora, and in the grammar, they use vernacular present tense forms with s. The second is social network. In social network, it refers to people's speech differently, reflects the types of networks they belong to. In social network, there are two types. The first one is density, which means that whether the member of a person network are in touch with each other. And the second is flexity, whether there are many types of transaction members are involved in. In social network, there is a communities of practice and the construction of social identity. Communities of practice develop around the activities which group members engage in another, and they share objectives and attitudes.
Okay, I will continue. The material is about language change. Language change is the phenomenon by which permanent alterations are made in the features and the use of the language over time. In language change, there are several parts. There is variation and change. Post-vocalists are its spread and its status, and the next the spread of the vernacular forms, and then coinage and coinizations, and then how do change spread, and how do we study language change, and reasons for language change, and the next about variation change. Variation change. Language variant in their measures which are interestingly inserted over time in physical, speech, and socially. Language change variation over time has its origins in spatial, or regional and social variation. The source of the change over time is always ground variation. So the regional and social variants described in the previous 3 chapters provide the basis for language change over time. And next about post-vocalists are its birth and its status. So the pronunciation of R in English-speaking communities provide a wealth of examples completely of linguistic variation and language change, as well as the arbitrariness of the forms which happen to be standard in any community, while R less speech is the prestigious from which is still spreading in England. In some part of America, it is the rhetorics variety which is interesting. The next is about the spread of vernacular forms. It is easy to understand that a pronunciation which are considered prestigious will be imitated and will spread through a community, but there are also many examples of vernacular pronunciations which have spread throughout speech communities. Not all linguistic changes involve adopting new forms from outside the speech community, nor do they always involve from which people are conscious of the prestigious forms. Okay, and the next is Keonis and Keonisation. Keonisation, this language change process is called Keonisation, and the result is coining, a variety which is the result of dialect contact. The Keoni will typically have some features from each of the contributing dialects, with most features typically coming from the dialect of the large group of the speakers. Okay, the next material is how the change there are three parts. It is from group to group, the second from style to style, and the third is from word to word. From group to group, many linguistics have used a couple of myths to explain how linguistic changes work through a community. Social factors such as age, status, gender, and region of age, the radius of the change, and the directions in which the wave flows swiftly. The wave type is one useful way of visualizing the spread of change from one group to another, and then from style to style. In the speech of particular individual, it suggests the change spread from one style to another, say from more formal speech to more casual speech, while at the same time it spreads from one individual to another within a social group and subsequently from one social group to another. And then from word to word lexical diffusion, it seems to be the case sound change not only spread from one person to another and from only style to another style, they also spread from one word to another. Sound change spread through different words one by one. This is called lexical diffusion. When a sound change begins on the word with particular vowel don't change at once in the speech of a community. And the next is how do we study language change? There are two. Part is present time studies of language change, and the second language change in real time. Apparent time studies of language change. A great deal of linguistic variation is stable, but some is an indicator of linguistic change in progress. As studies increase or studies decline in the frequency of form like age group suggests to sociolinguistic that a change may be in progress in the speech community, whereas a bell-shaped pattern is more typical of simple variation. And the second language change in real time. Sometimes, however, it is possible to build on the work of earlier linguistic way to study change dictionary, which provide a depth and form most first known can assist in ranging change in vocabulary over time. Okay, the next point is reason for language change. In reason for language change, there are three parts. There is social status and language change, and the second gender and language change, and the third is direction and language change, social status, and language change areas, there is still a great deal of research and discussion about which social groups introduce linguistic change. One answer seems to be that a linguistic change may enter a speech community to social group, but the different types of change are associated with different groups. And then the second, gender and language change. Differences in women and men's speech are another source of variation which can result in linguistic change. Sometimes women are the innovators, leading and linguistic change, and sometimes women tend to be associated with change toward word, prestige, and vernacular norms, whereas men more often introduce vernacular change. And third, interaction and language change. Interaction and contact between people is critical in providing the channel for linguistic change, as previous examples have implied. In this final session, I briefly identify more explicitly the way in which interaction, or lack of it, has affected the progress of linguistic change in a number of communities. Linguistic change generally progress most slowly in tightly knit communities which have little contact with the outside world. There are plenty of examples of this where isolation is contributed to linguistic conservatism. I think that's all my explanation.